And as we turn to our next guest, we continue this journey through memory and identity, this tracing the footsteps of a history that refuses to be forgotten.
To deepen this conversation, we turn now to someone whose work bridges the past and present through storytelling, preservation, and truth-telling. Joining us is Mr. Obinna Okafor, the founder and convener of the Tales and Preservation of Ututu Cultural Heritage Foundation. He is a respected cultural historian, community advocate, and one of the leading voices preserving the heritage and memory of the ancient Arachuku civilization, a civilization that played a complex and often misunderstood role in the era of the transatlantic slave trade. Mr. Kaufo, you're welcome to this discussion.
Yes, good afternoon, our dear convener, Mary. I thank you so much for bringing this interview to our doorstep today. And then we are rightly here to have a talk show with you. I must say thank you. God bless you.
You're welcome. Thank you. As someone deeply rooted in preserving the Ututu and Arachuku heritage, how do you approach the uncomfortable truths that part of the Arachuku Empire were implicated in the transatlantic slave trade? Beyond the colonial narrative, what hidden dimensions or internal complexities of that period do you believe history has not fully told us?
Thank you so much for that question. And then we almost acknowledge that the Arachuku Empire's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade is actually a very complex and then an uncomfortable truth. And rather to approach this sensitive topic, it is very much important that we acknowledge the empire's significance.
Okay.
And then secondly, you asked about some of the untold stories. I would have to narrate a little story or sometimes what I perceive as a misconception about the story of the transatlantic slave trade. When you talk about the transatlantic slave trade, associating Arachuku, you cannot talk about the transatlantic slave trade without bringing the role of Ibini Babi in the narrative. Now, first of all, you may ask me, what do I mean when I say Ibini Babi? Ibini Babi, as many people know, was a very powerful and a revered oracle all over Igbo land as of the 13th centuries and the 14th centuries, even before the advent of the white man.
Okay.
The Ibini Babi was such a very powerful oracler that was revered all over Igbo land. But on the other hand, I think greed and some sort of personal interest or mercantile ideology actually played a very, very heinous role.
Yeah.
The Ibini Babi Shrine was a sacred institution where the gods' wisdom and guidance were sought by people from far and wide. However, the arrival of the European slave traders, or the Europeans as likely you may call them, around the year 15th century marked the beginning of a dark and a sinister chapter in the history of Ibini Babi. You know, as the transatlantic slave trade gained momentum, some Arrow traders, driven by greed and ambition, saw an opportunity to exploit the revered oracle for their gain. They began to manipulate the sacred traditions of Ibini Babi, using its authority to capture and sell countless Igbo people into slavery. The oracle wands a symbol of protection, and justice was now being used to condemn innocent people to a life of bondage, to a life of pain, and to a life of torture.
Okay.
You know, the arrow traders would bring individuals to the Ibini shrine,
Okay.
laying accusation of different kind of crimes or death. And the oracle's verdict will be used to justify their enslavement.
Okay.
Mary, I would have to testify to you that honestly that many were sold to European traders. I mean in their thousands, and in their millions. And in the process, a lot lost their lives. 98% of them were displaced and dispersed until they cannot even trace their origin. They cannot even trace their descendants, never to be seen again. They all were dispersed. The arrow traders profited handsomely from this human trafficking, while the Ibini shrine became a tool of oppression and exploitation. Sometimes we may reveal some of these things to you because I think some form of mayhem is still going on in some different area of Igbo land or far around the world. You know, the dark period in the history of Ibini was marked by deceit and manipulation. The arrow traders, they used their influence and power to corrupt the sacred tradition of the oracle, turned it into a tool for their gain. Again, the impact of this exploitation was devastating, with countless lives lost and families torn apart. I mean, these are some of the untold stories that people may not have actually heard about the transatlantic slave trade. It was as a result of self-gain. It was as a result of human intent to amass wealth, losing that human sympathy and humanity. So the scenario or the history itself is quite a very touching one, even till date, as we speak.
Wow. Wow, this sounds so emotional already. I just felt so emotional as you're talking.
Yes, it's such a very, very emotional.
It is.
Narrative.
It is, honestly. Okay, so moving into the next question, there is often.
No, I have something to add. I have something to add because
sorry.
it's actually not really complete because
it's already emotional. Sorry, it's already emotional.
Yes,
so I don't
it is emotional. But I want to let you know that every time you mention Arechuku Empire, but Arechuku was not the only empire or the kingdom that witnessed the transatlantic slave trade. There was another kingdom that lived side by side with the Arechuku empires. And this is the Ututu Ancient Kingdom. I don't know if you have heard about Ututu Ancient Kingdom.
Yeah.
I will be bringing you a little story about Ututu Ancient Kingdom, who actually lived side by side with the Arechuku Empire. Same time, the transatlantic slave trade was on the rise. Do you know that the Ututu Ancient Kingdom never participated in the transatlantic slave trading? They did not. Instead, they bought slaves, secured their freedoms, and joined them with their families, reunited with them, and made them blameless. Because in this ancient kingdom of Ututu, there was a remarkable tradition of compassion and kinship. Within that period of time, the dark days of the transatlantic slave trade, while some communities were entangled in the web of slavery, the Ututu people stood out of their extraordinary act of bravery and humanity. Rather than participating in the slave trade, many Ututu indigenes chose to redeem slaves, purchasing them with their own money and welcoming them into their families.
Wow.
I am bringing this story to you, and I'm also going to make references. If you go to Ututu today, there are some families, there are some communities that I will point out to you. If you go there and you ask questions, you are going to have some very, very comforting answers. These were some of the communities where you have some of these slaves that were reinstated as families. On such remarkable story is the story or the tale of one Eze Ukwenye of Obi Ukweng. The Obi Ukweng is resident in Ukwaku, Ututu. Ukwaku is in Ututu. You see, this noble leader, being driven by a sense of duty and compassion, he would often travel to the coast where he would purchase the freedom of enslaved individuals instead of turning them over to slave trader. That Eze Ukwenye would bring them back to Ututu, where they would be absorbed into the community and become part of his family.
Okay.
These redeemed slaves were given Ututu names, and they become integral members of the community. They were provided with shelter, food, and then protection. And they were encouraged to build new lives for themselves. Then the Tutu people saw the inherent value and the dignity in every human being, regardless of their background or circumstances. You know, this tradition of redeeming slaves, it wasn't just unique to Eze Ukwenye, but rather many Ututu indigenes shared compassion and commitment to helping those in need. They risked their own lives and resources to save countless individuals with the horror of slavery. And in doing so, they created a legacy for themselves, a legacy of kindness and generosity, of which if you go back to the land called the Ututu Ancient Kingdom, you will still feel that generosity, that kindness, that love in humanity. Even up until this generation and more generations to come. It is another story that maybe was never told. And then there is yet more other stories that maybe you may have not heard.
Yeah.
Maybe in time, most of these stories will come to you. So I think I've given you a reference, and then if you go to you ask about Ukwenye, or you ask about Obi Ukweng or Ukwaku, I think you have some very good stories that will show you areas in Ututu where you have some people who were identified as slaves of in those days, who were also inculcated in some families, given new names, and then absorbed as families.
Okay.
But all the same, we keep on hearing the story of Warrichuku being involved in the transatlantic slave trade. But what about that part of the other story? That there were some persons who also bought slaves, not to trade them, but to redeem them back into the community.
Wow, this is a nice one.
It's quite a touching story. It's quite a very touching story.
Yeah, it is. It is. Thank you so much for this information. Okay,
Thank you so much.
There is often silence when it comes to moral responsibility, not for blame, but for healing. In your view, What practical or symbolic steps can the descendants of communities once involved in the trade take today to foster a reconciliation with the descendants of those who were sold or displaced?
Well, that question, even though it's it is a heavy question, because if I may understand, you are asking the victim, what if
Yeah.
there is need for reconciliation?
Yeah.
What is there is need for a sort of appeasement?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing is to honor the ancestors, honoring the ancestors and healing the wounds.
And that will bring
Because if
healing.
you,
That will bring healing
yeah,
because the sole aim
of
of
course,
reconciliation is healings, right? So that
of course.
people can actually, it's easy to say forgive, but when you forgive, do you forget? So I think reconciliation
It's
will actually bring
difficult.
healings into the communities because this has really done more harm than good to the people. So that's what I'm asking.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. The first thing is to, honoring the ancestors and healing the wounds. That's the first thing you
First thing
must
first.
identify with. Yes,
Yeah.
because if you want to make this reconciliation a noteworthy one, because these persons we are talking about, they are our ancestors. They carry our DNA, they carry our blood, they carry our vibrations. These are the things that lives with them. And most of them were drowned in deep seas. Most of them were dispersed even on their route to the foreign land. They lost their lives.
Hmm.
And this pain is living with us up until when time permits. So we must acknowledge the past. In so doing, we are going to honor our ancestors, and then the wound must be healed. Then there is a need to facilitate dialogue, because if you identify that you have hurt some set of persons, you must come to a round table. The first thing you need to do is to acknowledge that, firstly, that you have wronged these people.
Yeah.
Then you need to enact dialogue and ask them, how do we get this better? Because between the descendants of the slave traders and the enslaved people, providing a safe space for sharing experiences, apologies, and forgiveness is very, very, very needful. Then there's need for memorialization. There is need for memorialization. In as much as these people has been victims of slave trading, that archive must never be erased.
Sure.
That memory must never be erased. So there needs to be a need for the building of museums. We may forgive, but how can we forget? So that's part of it.
There is often silence when it comes to moral responsibility, not for blame but for healing. In your view, what practical or symbolic steps can the descendants of communities once involved in the trade take today to foster reconciliation with the descendants of those who were sold or displaced?
Well, if I should answer that question, first thing I would say is in the spirit of reconciliation, which is very much not a bad spirit.
Okay.
The first thing we must gather today is to acknowledge the historical injustices of the transatlantic slave trade and its ongoing impact in the communities and the descendants of those who were enslaved. Because the transatlantic slave trade is a journey that really damaged generations. It is a journey that dispersed families, loved ones. It is a journey of torture. It is a journey that men, women will never forget in the history of mankind. So when we begin to talk about reconciliation on that note, I think the very first thing we must not overlook is to acknowledging the past.
Okay.
In the process of acknowledging the past, we must identify with the fact that there was injustices meted to people. We
Okay.
must identify with the fact that this truth of a fact wasn't a matter of accusation to the Western world, that this truth of a fact is just a matter of the fact and what it remains. So you must identify that yes, you were not accused, you were not alleged over.
Okay.
So then we begin to talk about. So we must first of all acknowledge the past. We must know that it's not a matter of accusation, that it really, really happened. So from acknowledging the past, then we must come to terms and then know that there is need for dialogue and reconciliation. We must facilitate dialogue seasons between the descendants of the slave traders and enslaved people because we all must provide a safe place for sharing experience, apologies, and forgiveness. Because all of us, we have a blood, we have memory, and this whole thing lives right inside of us. And there is need for memorialization. Yes, there is need for that. We must keep this memory. We must build cultural centers where we preserve our memories. We must build museums where we keep these memories alive because this mayhem was committed against our ancestors and their DNA is right inside of us. It's something that we cannot write off. Then there was need for cultural exchange. Must organize cultural exchange programs that promote mutual understandings and respect between communities, preserving the history and cultural heritage of the enslaved and the descendant. These things are very much important and they are things we must never look, we mustn't look over it. If actually there is genuity in the pronouncement of reconciliation. So I think for that is the little I can put
Yeah.
there.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next question I want to ask is, with the rising movements led by figures like Dr. Morel to restore Nigerian citizenship to African Americans, how do you see cultural foundations like yours helping these returning descendants reintegrate not just legally but spiritually and culturally into the ancestral spaces their bloodline once belonged to?
Well, the theory that Dr. Mallory is actually
Dr.
piloting is a very,
Morel.
very good one.
Dr. Morel.
Dr. Mallory,
Yeah.
actually, yes, yes, it's a very, very wonderful one because there is need for the African Americans, of which they are the people, they are the descendants of the enslaved. There is need for them to be reintegrated to their motherland. And as of today, their motherland is Nigeria, where some of us are domiciled. So, and then the movement to restore Nigerian citizenship to African American is quite a complex issue, because it's something that is rooted in country's history as law regarding citizenship, because you already these people have an identity, they have an American identity. So for them to be reintegrated to their um, land of descendants, they must pass through the normal route. You know, one of them is the eligibility for Nigerian citizenship. All right,
Yeah.
so they must identify first of all as a sovereign state that they are Nigeria. So they will come over, obtain Nigerian citizenship through descent, registration, and neutralization.
Okay.
To qualify through descent, they must prove their lineage to a Nigerian ancestor. Because if we happen to be another country, for instance, Ghana, I think in Ghana you still have a whole lot of African Americans who travel down to Ghana just to witness the the road of no return. So many of them are there. You can see them on your internet. They're all over there to witness the very last point where some of the slaves were kept until their shipments to the Europeans. You know, and the requirement for citizenship, you can't talk about requirement without talking about demonstrating good character. You must show that you have the good qualities to be called a Nigerian. You know, and then you must renounce your previous citizenship. Okay, so that's the mediums in which you must pass through before you identify. So these are the little means you must pass through before you must be identified as a Nigerian until you obtain you get engaged with your home of descent. I will have, for instance, somebody like a popular preacher, TD Jakes, who is resident in Dallas, Texas. One time has actually identified with the Igbo origin, with his Igbo origin. He says his forefathers were of the Igbos. So he is an Igbo man. I think he has visited Nigeria one or two occasions. So yes, our African American brothers can still identify with us, be called one of us because rightly they are one of us, and then they must be one of us.
Sure.
So then you ask me how do I see cultural foundation like my foundation,
Yeah.
Tales and Preservation to Cultural Heritage Foundation, helping the returning descendants
Yeah.
reintegrate not just legally but spiritually and culturally. Cultural foundations like the Tales and Preservation of Tutu Cultural Heritage Foundation can play a vital role in helping returnees, descendants integrate into the ancestral spaces. Yes, we can. We can. All right. Yes, we can because actually it is part of what we are doing. And one of the very first thing we should put down is preservation of cultural heritage, which is what we are for, which is what we are doing, you know. And then by documentation and archiving, we are putting down the histories of our forefathers. We are archiving them. You understand?
Yeah.
The foundation can document and archive cultural artifacts, traditions, and historical sites, preserve it to heritage for future generations. So I think through that means we can. And then through spiritual reintegration, the restoration of sacred sites. Our foundation can work towards restoring sacred sites such as grave sites of Ututu Exema. We have a great site which every May, especially the great site of the the very great man who established it, every May, every month of May, every year. is a special day in the land of Ututu. Yes, it is the day we honor our ancestors. It is the day we show deep reverence
Okay.
to our ancestors by dancing, showing the that great compassion of love and oneness that has always been within us. And then it is the day of reverence. We dance and then until we get to the graveside of the very first man who established that great kingdom called it, you know. And our dear foundation through education and awareness. By promoting awareness and understanding of Ututu's cultural heritage, the foundation can educate returning descendants about their roots and cultural identity. You understand?
Yeah, I do.
So then we cannot mention all of this without cultural reintegration through community engagement. The foundation can facilitate community engagement, and cultural exchange programs, enabling returning descendants to connect with their community and learn about their cultural traditions. These are the things we can be doing. We must also attach language and cultural education. We can achieve that by providing language and cultural education programs. The foundation can help returning descendants learn about their cultural heritage and develop a sense of belonging.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much.
Mr. Okafor. Your insight reminds us that reconciliation begins with truth, and that preserving culture is not only about honoring what was beautiful, but also about confronting what was painful. Only through that balance can identity, healing, and belonging truly be restored. Thanks for your time on this
I'm very, very
discussion.
grateful, and I wish for more of your engagements in time to come.
That's fine.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
We are grateful from details and the preservation of Ututu Cultural Heritage Foundation. All of us say a big thank you to you. God bless you, Mary.
God bless you all. Thank you. Okay, have a nice day. Bye.
Have a nice day.